we're charismatic. So when it comes to doing the prophetic reviews, we've always been doing that. We're like, you guys are putting it out on public display. It deserves some sort of charismatic responding to it,
Mhm.
rather than the Justin Peters of the world who are already going to carte blanche dismiss it, because by the very nature of you saying that you're speaking on behalf of God prophetically, in his mind, you're already a heretic. And so we wanted to respond and say, look, no, we don't go that far with it. We actually think prophecy is a real thing today. However, here's what we think about this.
All right, I want to welcome everybody to the Sacramental Charismatic podcast. I am your host, Luke Garrity. I've been on an extended break for 8 months because I'm lazy. I'm lazy. There's no other excuse for that. But we're going to jump in season 5 today, and I'm super pumped about today's guest as the one and only Michael Miller from Remnant Radio. Michael, welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
Dude, I'm super pumped about having you on here because you're the only podcast that I am actually aware of and I listen to. So,
You actually listen to us. You're the
yeah,
one, huh?
yeah, I do. I'm your me and your moms are all probably no.
Yeah.
You guys have done a great job of building that. And so I guess before we jump in, for the few people that might not be aware of Remnant Radio, obviously there's probably some people out there, but you guys are doing a great job. Very consistent content. You guys address so many relevant topics for the evangelical charismatic traditions and beyond. But I'd love to know, a little about yourself. What's something important to know about Michael Miller?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I live in Denver, Colorado. Married, 2 kids, one more on the way.
Sweet.
Been here since on and off since 2018. Is that right? 2016, on here, off and off. Yes, 2016. So I planted a church out here, then moved back to Dallas, planted another church, and then got fired, and then moved back here in 2020 to plant the church that I'm at now, called Reclamation. So I've been here for 5 years doing that. That's where my office is, where my studio is. I don't know what else to tell you. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
semi-liturgical church. We quote from the Apostles' Creed, Nicene Creed. We have communion every week. Uh,
God bless you.
yeah,
Well
I would
done.
imagine I would fit within your sacramental charismatic world quite fine.
Yes, you do. Yeah, that's awesome. So you have 2 kids, but one on the way.
Yeah, dude, I'm an old dog, and I'm doing this. We're going.
Man,
We
good for
put
you.
got another one in the net, and it's coming. So
Yeah.
November is the day, and yeah, I'm pretty stoked. We'll find out, and I guess I don't know, 5, 6 weeks. What kind of baby we're having?
Yeah, that's great.
Uh,
Hopefully a human. That'd be good
yeah, it
to
won't be a
make sure.
unicorn, not this time.
Yeah, that's good. That's awesome, man. Yeah, it's funny. My wife and I, we have 5, and our youngest is 11. So I'm like, man, I can kind of like now I'm starting to like,
You can see
7
the
more
light at the end of the
years.
tunnel there on
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah,
But I was
yeah.
thinking the other day, I was like, what would it be like to have another kid? And then I had a full on mental and emotional breakdown. So good on you.
Oh, dude, I'm like graying outward, and I'm thinking to myself like, okay, I'm doing this again. We're stepping back into the world of diapers, um, and I couldn't be more excited. I think the
Yeah.
timing of it is really. While I wish we had had another kid much earlier, I'm super grateful for the fact that we're still able to have kids, and
Yeah.
yeah,
That's great. Yeah. So, Remnant Radio, maybe just I'd love to ask you some questions a little bit about how you got involved in that. Cause I think you guys have all been you guys have been friends for a while, it seems like, and kind of been peers in churches and things like that. Is that the case?
sort of. Yeah, so Michael Roundtree and I go back 20 years. So we were both discipled at a church in Fort Worth, Texas called Wellspring Church by Jack
Mhm.
Deere, who is a kind of a, you know, middle history vineyard guy during
Yeah.
sort of the prophetic renewal, which has got a spotty little bit of history. But Jack was the one who mentored us, and Josh and I met in 2018 18. I was working for the Upper Room in, I helped start the Upper Room Frisco, which is like I think a third or fourth church plant. And he had me on as a guest on his show, and it had like 300 subscribers. And then when I got fired in 2019, he was like, "Hey, you want to co-host?" And I was like, "I got nothing else to do. Sure."
Yeah.
Actually, I said no for initially. I was so like, kind of like, you don't want some has been, used up pastor that was just spit out. And my wife was like, "You're being an idiot. Go do this podcast. You guys have fun theological conversations." And so,
Yeah.
um, Josh and I mean, that year I kind of lost all my friends. It was a horrific year, but Josh became one of my best friends in a very short
Mm,
amount of time. And he was kind of, the podcast, I say, was part of nursing me back to health.
mm,
Um, and so it was kind of a crazy deal. And then Michael took my spot on the show in 2020 when I went to go plant the church in Denver. And then I started co-hosting again in 2021. After they started making money with the podcast, they could afford some equipment and
mhm.
installed a studio in my basement. So we've been doing that ever since.
Oh, that's amazing. That's great. Yeah, I mean, Jack Deere, that's pretty cool because he's, such a prominent feature in vineyard history. And he actually, his book, Surprised by the Power of the Spirit, literally kept me from abandoning the charismatic tradition.
I can
Yeah,
understand that.
yeah,
I
I
can
mean,
understand the
it was pretty.
propensity to abandon. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean, I was going to a reformed seminary and just really struggling with some of the crazy stuff I had, experienced. And I remember reading that book, and it was a lot of history about the vineyard that I was just unaware of, even though I grew up in the vineyard. But it was just such a robustly exegetical. I mean, the biblical theology arguments against cessationism, which is what I was being fed on a daily,
Oh yeah,
daily,
yeah.
yeah, in those circles. But it was such a profoundly influential book. And then obviously, kind of lost touch with his work. But I read his autobiography a few years ago when I was driving to Montana with a friend to go
Oh,
fly fishing. I
oh
read the
yeah.
book in the entire sitting,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, that was a memoir, and it
yeah,
was meant to be more of a memoir about friendship with God, and
hmm
it was supposed to be what Jack would say, an unfiltered, uh, unsanitized version of the Christian life. Like he wanted to
yeah,
tell the whole truth, because most of the kinds of stories that people share are usually sugar coated.
yeah,
And even then, he had a hard time with the publishing company wanting to take certain cuss words out and put in,
yeah.
more neutral language. But he wanted to do the best he could to keep it as honest as he could too. And that's
It
one of the
it
things I've
it
always loved
is.
about Jack.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, it is one of the best
brutally
memoirs I've
honest.
read. Yeah, I literally was. It was funny. I was driving with a friend. He was driving. I just kept reading when we were coming back from Montana, and I mean, I was like weeping at points because I could just. It was so
Yeah.
identifiable. I think in many ways too. So yeah,
Well, it's
that's
interesting
cool.
because he tells his history and why he left Wimber, his mentor,
Yeah,
and it
yeah,
was divided loyalties between him and Paul Kane,
hmm
and Jack chose Paul and regrets it, to this
yeah,
day.
yeah,
So it's
yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, it is fascinating. I mean, it's like definitely a part of our, the vineyards history quite a bit, to read it, like, oh my gosh, because I remember a lot of
Mhm.
those events too. I remember when I was like probably 12 or 13, it was when the Kansas City thing was like really going down.
Oh yeah.
And people, I was actually living in Denver, and we were part of a vineyard there, and people were
Oh,
moving from our church to Kansas City to be a part of the great end time
wait,
revival.
where in Denver were you? I guess you're
I was
12,
in a
13. You probably don't remember super well, but
Yeah, well, no, I was in Aurora. We lived in Aurora, Smoky Hill Vineyard. Um,
okay.
yeah, so which I think is still there, I believe. But yeah, it was crazy, just because I remember at that time people were like, "No, this is it, this is the end time revival, and we're gonna go be a part of it." So yeah, didn't work
Yeah,
out.
I find the whole thing, and just being honest with you, the whole thing is suspicious to me. I've talked to Sam Storms, and he's got a number of like ways of affirming some of these things really did happen. But I'm just like, that doesn't
Yeah,
mean, I don't know. It's such a checkered history now, knowing what we know.
for sure. Yeah, I mean, even as a kid, I was like, "That's weird."
Yeah.
Just felt weird, but. Yeah, so that's cool. So Remnant Radio is you guys brought. I mean, I'm shocked at how often you guys. I mean, I'm actually impressed, you guys, because I know you guys are involved in local church ministry. You're very committed to local churches. You're doing it. You guys are, not just podcast people, and yet you're able to consistently put out resources that are a huge blessing for the larger church. How has that grown, I guess, in your life? And how do you, and actually, I'm kind of curious, how do you balance, being a local church pastor, church planner,
Oh
father,
gosh,
soon to be three, podcasting? I mean, you just show up and just rattle off ideas, or do you guys prep? What's your Slack channel look
there
like?
is. There's a Slack channel. There is prep. Josh works full time for the Remnant, so
Hmm.
and he has the pastorate position. So um, and then Michael and I is sort of a part time side gig for us. And so,
Cool.
you know, there are days when Josh is in over his head and he's like, "Hey, can one of you prep for the show this week?" And we'll step in. But by and large, Josh does most of the show notes for us, the vast majority of
Cool.
them. And it's also easy because we have a guest on once a week, so it's not like it's just us producing content. It's a guest who has content. All we have to do is ask interesting questions, to just kind of
Hmm.
draw that content out of them. But the other part of this is that Michael and Josh and I, we have a history with the charismatic gifts. Michael and I both being discipled by a seminary prof who was also a charismatic. That aided quite a bit, and so there's content that we were preparing for years before we ever had a pulpit to preach on. Um, and that helped when it came to doing this kind of show because when I came into more of the charismatic giftings, I never quite fit in the charismatic world. I loved church history. I loved theology. I loved doctrine. Um, and I didn't see that as antithetical to being spirit led, like what you hear in many of the Bethel environments. You hear stuff like, it's supposed to be, spirit led, not mind led, as if those two things were mutually
Yeah.
exclusive. And so I just never saw that as an issue. And so, fortunately, when the time we had with Jack Deere was also like grilling us on different theological issues, and so that made it helpful from when the day when suddenly we're doing a podcast on what does it mean to be a charismatic that actually cares deeply about theology and doctrine and practice and all of those things. So
Hmm.
a lot of the content comes pretty easy for us when it comes to those particular things. Now, we did
Yeah.
an e-course on the Nicene Creed, and I had to do some work on that. Like
Hmm.
that was a lot for us.
Yeah. Yeah, jumping into a little bit more, maybe an area of theological discourse that you hadn't spent
Yeah.
quite as much time. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, it seems like that's what I enjoy about when I watch or listen to your guys' podcasts. Is it seems like it is really natural. You guys talk about a lot of topics that just are near and dear to your hearts. You either have experience on or you're reading on. So, but it's been fun too. You guys have had
Yeah,
a
we're
lot of
always
guests.
reforming too.
Yeah, I mean, but
Yes.
you've had some guests on that I'm like, oh, that's fascinating because you're like, yeah, we know nothing about this topic. Let's talk about it. So I think the first
Yeah.
one I ever listened to that I was like, that's awesome. Is you had apostolic succession? I think it was an Anglican
Yeah.
bishop on. Yeah, that was cool.
Yeah. 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 That was fun. Yeah. That gets more of your liturgical, sacramental itch scratch, doesn't it?
Yeah, well,
Uh,
it's interesting because I like you. I mean, I didn't grow up in the liturgical sacramental tradition at all. I mean, I discovered sacramentality in grad school and was like, wait, what? They talk about the Holy Spirit there? Like, what is
yeah.
this? And then, just dived into it when I was writing my dissertation and really, came out with like, man, there's so much stuff that we just don't talk about in the charismatic world that is super pneumatological. We just don't have like frameworks for it. So there's a lot
What?
of that, like the apostolic succession part. I'm still like I'm a closet Anglican in my
Wait.
heart.
You mean that the New Apostolic Reformation isn't actually new? It's
Yeah,
ancient? Oh, okay.
that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. It's like there's a lot of things that really do connect with what functionally maybe or even in practices, but we just don't have the theological resources or awareness of the history within the within the church. So it's really fun hearing those conversations because I really am trying to figure out my thinking on apostolic succession right now. Partly because of my disdain for NAR, and yet not. I don't want to throw it all out because I think there are some fascinating components of that world. So yeah, so you guys do a great job.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah. Well, let's jump into really what I need you to fix for
That was that.
so you guys have been I felt like through the Alan Scott stuff, which I've done a lot of podcasts on that and a lot of discussions on that. You guys have been really vocal, not in a trollish way, but you guys have not been afraid to name names. You guys have not been afraid
Mhm.
to speak out on controversial topics throughout. The last couple of years has been, it's been like, dude, whoa. Um,
Well, we've
I
been in a
guess,
dumpster fire and didn't know it.
yeah,
That's the
we
truth.
did.
Charismatic movement as a whole. So
That's
yeah.
right. Yeah. I guess, what do you feel like are, like maybe a few of the top challenges for the charismatic tradition, just for our neck of the woods, those of us who are committed to the ongoing practice of spiritual gifts and wanting the spirit to come in power. What are some of the challenges that you feel like are most important right now to address?
You mean to the spirit coming in power
No, I mean,
or
like
just in
just
the
to the
charismatic
charismatic
movement in
tradition.
general?
Yeah. Like, for churches, for those of us who want those things, what are some of the challenges that we have to deal with?
Yeah, the interesting thing is seeing power is not the thing that's hard to see. Like that, I see all the time. I see demons get cast out of people. I see regular healings. Um, I prayed for somebody just last week. Saw a 500-year-old curse get broken off of a person. Um, and then, man, so I see a number of those kind of things. But sadly, power is not the concern when it comes to experiencing this stuff. I think we can see that stuff all the time. My biggest concern is probably the failed ecclesiology we have in most of the charismatic world. Um, the fact that you've got somebody like Michael Brown who's just committed, who 23 years ago committed an egregious sin, but has been actively sinning ever since then by hiding that story and
Mhm.
keeping that person discredited and isolated. And then you've got a church that's willing to back him and publicly denounce anybody as the accuser of the brethren who might go, "Hey, he shouldn't be reinstated." Um, we have a failed system when it comes to accountability of leaders. And there is a lot of programming that kind of goes with it when it comes to keeping people silent. Accuser of the brethren just being a case in point. Like you're the accuser of the brethren if you name names or call people out and say, "Hey, I disagree with this." Um, and I think if in some sense we've seen a shift, like the gatekeepers have been removed. So when it comes to dictating public narrative, now Luke Garrity can start his own Sacramental podcast. He can call Alan Scott out at will, and nobody can stop that. And that's actually, I think, a good thing. It's leveled the playing field when it comes to having a voice. It's no longer the person with a pulpit that can dictate the narrative. It's now anybody who's willing to speak up and has the gall to do so. And I would say it's a spirit-led gall, in my opinion, not a accuser-led bit of call. So, yeah, I think that's probably the biggest problem we're facing right now in the charismatic movement is there is no accountability structures. I think the Vineyard in particular is kind of facing a lot of that right now.
Hmm.
You just had Mike Winger do that expose on Micah Turnbow.
Yeah.
Well, why did Mike Winger have to do that?
Yeah.
Like his stuff was out there. There's plenty
Yeah.
of Vineyard leaders who could have said, "Hey, this is a bit out there and this is probably not good. And this seems like being inflated and puffed up with visions and taking your stand on angelic visitations." Like that could have happened. And
Yeah.
yet it was somebody outside of the Vineyard that called it out. And then they responded because it got so much public attention.
Hmm.
Um, and that's really the sad part is why did it take so much of public attention for somebody to do something about that?
Yeah.
So not just the Vineyard, but I mean, across the board, you've got the New Apostolic Reformation. And I know everybody claims that they're not NAR and they don't find the
Yeah.
term helpful. And I get it. Like it has been used as a charismatic boogeyman. Like if you believe in the gifts, you're NAR, which we both know that's not true.
Hmm.
Um, However, I also think it's a very real thing. See Peter Wagner and his split with the Vineyard with John Wimber has continued to today, and it very much has trickled down into the most popular of charismatic branding. And I think Bethel would be the poster child for it. Even though
Yeah.
they would deny that they're NAR, they would say, "Oh, we've got an elder board." But yet, when you read Danny Silk's book, the way he
Mhm.
devalues teaching and makes it like you're going to get a subpar church, you're not going to get all that God intends. You don't
Mhm.
have the recipe for revival if you don't have an apostle at the top, which really just means some sort of CEO visionary.
Mhm.
Um, so it's everywhere. Our ecclesiological structures have failed us, and they failed the sheep.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like that it's interesting hearing you say that, because that's, I mean, that would be that's always my thought. When it comes to the charismatic tradition, is our ecclesiology is just a pile of trash, non-existent. And, behind that, it seems like too, the anti-intellectualism and unwillingness to even think theologically to get to an ecclesiological commitment and structure would be a problem too. Do you, so,
That
you know,
wasn't early Vineyard though, that's for sure. I mean, they didn't have Jack
I,
Deere on as
true.
a theologian in the church because
Yeah,
they didn't care about theology or they thought it was
I know.
somehow antithetical to being led by the Spirit.
Yeah, I don't know if you're familiar with Don Williams, but Don Williams was one of our mainstay vineyard theologians, PhD from Columbia. I mean, he's an OG.
Yeah.
He's passed away now, but I mean, I have all these, vineyard booklets and workbooks that were handed out back in the '80s, and no, you did not. I mean, I listened to a lot of Don Williams' lectures. Conference lectures would be a good way, not inspiring talks. The difference,
Sure.
and yeah, it's like I
Do
think
you,
the culture has won.
do you think the shift happened for the Vineyard at least with Toronto and what happened there?
Yeah, I think just I've been actually doing quite a bit of um, research slash just reading. So I've had like some really cool people have donated me like boxes of these old vineyard handbooks and things, from conferences. And it seems like, yeah, by the mid '90s, I mean, the Kansas City Prophet days, there were a lot of handouts and whatnot. It's like the Mike Bickle thing. The right to copy. The copyright's the right to copy. Give you
Yeah, yeah.
tons of these booklets, but the substance changed for sure, where it went from being kind of your more robustly evangelical theology framework to less and less. And I mean, now I can't remember the last time there was a really good resource that was handed out at a conference,
Yeah. Well,
partly.
my concern, I mentioned the ecclesiological failures, but I would say the bigger concern is how I actually think charismaticism leads to deconstruction today. That's a really, you
Yeah.
know, deconstruction to heterodoxy,
Yeah.
deconstruction to denying the penal substitutionary atonement, and then going further than that to embrace Christian universalism.
Yeah.
Um, that's a bigger
Totally.
thread, I know, and it's a slippery
No,
slope
it's true.
argument, but I think I could make a pretty strong case that one in fact leads to the other, and I'm a full blown charismatic. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think you're right. I mean, there's definitely, it's just so fascinating to, no, not fascinating. I mean, I think it's sad too, and
no,
also
it's
very
interesting,
concerning.
right? It is like how does one pull
Yeah.
that thread and see that
Totally.
that sweater unravel by going from here
Yeah.
to there?
Yeah,
Um,
you know what was really I think good about what you brought up about Silk's book, because it's interesting how many people have recommended the Culture of Honor book to me, and it's like, oh, what's the book about? Well, it's about honoring people, and I'm like, okay, so I got it, read
that's
it,
not what
and
it's about.
no, it's an ecclesiology. It is
It is.
literally a charismatic ecclesiology. I was like, dude, this
Well, he
is
calls it. He his
terrible.
quote is a recipe for revival,
Yeah,
and then he tells you
yeah,
what that recipe is, and
yeah,
it's all packaged within honor, but really
yeah.
these positions have to be
It's a
honored in the
structure.
church.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And it's interesting too, because it's like, this is the key to sustained revival. You have to have these five, structural roles, but it's just a train wreck, in my opinion. But yeah, so
Yeah.
you talk about ecclesiology, lack of structures, accountability, this necessity of being theologically thoughtful and, move as ways forward. I'm curious though, like what kind of, because you have been, I mean, dude, in many ways, I feel like there's such an affinity with you, because I just know that you're not going to shy away from saying what you think, and I love that about you.
Yeah.
Like there's,
People
but
love and hate that about me.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah, I mean, that's okay with me. I mean, I
you'll
think it's
always know where
important.
you stand with me, right? Like you
Yeah,
never have to be left second guessing
yeah,
because I'll
no,
always
it's
tell you
true.
exactly what I think.
Yeah, I mean, I've always felt like, I just have an affinity with it. I feel like we are soul brothers. Um, because partly also, I'm curious a little
Well,
bit
what got you
about.
so outspoken? Was it the Alan Scott stuff and how he kind of, you know,
No, I'm a jerk. I've always been a jerk. I just, I'm not afraid to say what I
well,
think.
I mean, bro, I've always said what I think, but I wasn't the kind that would name names. I used to
Yeah.
refrain from that. And I bought into some of the charismatic programming that if you do this,
Mm,
you got to check your motives. Like that's always the big
yeah.
thing is
Yeah.
check your motives because you could be
Yeah.
heading a very dangerous path.
Probably. Yeah. I also feel like, I've been around the Reformed tradition enough. I'm semi-reformed,
Oh, okay.
to where, so that
Yeah, yeah.
explains
Well,
everything.
they have no problem calling anything out, you know?
Yeah. It's
Like
like,
Martin
oops.
Luther is what he was, right? Like
Yeah.
if you're
Yeah.
reformed,
So,
you kind of go in that tradition. Yeah.
yeah, and also too. I mean, as much as we're joking around about that, I do think there's enough biblical precedent. I mean, Paul does not refrain from naming names. I think there's times that and actually, I would say even more so. Alan Scott was like the cherry on top for me because in my tradition within the vineyard, I've been quite frustrated for similar reason why you named earlier. It's like why do things have to get to where we have to say something when we say something?
Sure.
And so I have a working theory right now, and this is about charismatic world in general. But there's a really great book by Ed Friedman called "Failure of Nerve." I don't know if you've read that book, but it's about
No.
family systems. And I am currently it's the book I recommended to most people because I think it is possibly the best book that gives a synopsis of the state of the evangelical charismatic world. There is just a failure of nerve. There's a lack of courage. There's, which comes by way of a lot of different influences. I think part of it is, not wanting to be mean, not wanting to, speak out of turn. But what we've had happen is a unwillingness to protect the sheep, though. And that's really what's become a big motivation for me. Because for Alan Scott, after I talked to literally dozens of victims who I just started getting messages after I started, putting out podcasts and addressing some of the issues. I was getting like, tons of people who were like, hey, I was a victim, and they would share their story with me. And it was just absolutely atrocious. So then I feel like as a pastor,
Yeah.
I care about people. I mean, how can we not speak out and say something, when there's people who are still being harmed right now? I mean, he still has,
Oh,
a
dude.
couple hundred people who are being manipulated and mind controlled every Sunday.
It makes that story is so incredibly tragic. And it makes no sense to me why, if you've got a church of 200 and you've got this massive building and all these assets, and you claim that you're not stealing it or that you never
Yeah.
intended to steal it, cool. Why not just give it back?
Yeah.
Like I'm sure they'd be happy to put you up in a facility that can seat 300, which is exactly what you need. So
Yeah.
why hold on to all those assets? Like there's no explanation to me for that other
Yeah.
than some sort of personal thing.
Yeah.
Um,
It's as bad as it looks.
right. It doesn't make any sense from any outside perspective. And what I can't understand is why those who are on his board. Sorry, I'm going on a rant here because it makes me
Yeah.
angry too.
Go
I'm
rant.
not a vineyard guy. I'm out of the vineyard. I'm do my own thing. I'm complementarian, which is very non-vineyard these
Ooh,
days.
yeah. Okay. Hold on.
Yeah, yeah.
Ending the podcast. No, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I am like I'm a very soft complementarian. I just did a
Yeah.
message on why women should be allowed to
No,
teach in churches.
I do know you guys are, and it's the only area where I'm like, I disagree with those guys on
Right.
that one. But go ahead.
I know.
Go rant.
Um,
Give going.
well, I don't understand. Like, here's a person he's claiming that he's out to do this big thing, and yet things are continuing to dwindle. And when I talk to people from the actual church that were there, the former board members, um, I can't make sense of this. I lost my train of thought here. Where was I going to go with this? Um, oh, I had a nice little spicy rant for this, but
Well, it's just the whole fact that Alan's got, I mean, it's so egregious of taking everything,
oh,
manipulating people, et cetera, right?
yeah. So you've got guys on his board like Banning Leapshire. I guess maybe he's no longer on the board, but Banning's a very
We've heard
famous
that.
figure, right?
Mhm.
But why didn't Banning hold him accountable for that? Like, where is Chris Valentin in the midst of this? Who's one of Banning's apostolic oversights. It just seems like they totally failed, and they cared more about their view of honor than they cared about honoring victims.
Yeah.
That's the big thing that got me. And you probably saw I did it when the whole Mike Bickle thing came out, and you've got Chris Ballatin saying, I'm ready to restore Mike Bickle. If
Mhm.
only there had been a place for him to be able to confess his sins. And it's like, dude, where's the funds set aside to restore the victims? Like,
Yeah.
why is your immediate empathy only with those who've had power and then lost it? Why
Mm.
is it with those who never had power and have been silenced and further victimized?
Yeah.
That's what gets me here, is because I think all they can see are the leaders and their platforms, and they can't see the trail of dead bodies behind them. And this is really, I think, a prerequisite for anybody in pastoral ministry is you have to be able to empathize with those who don't have power. Those are your priority. You leave the 99, the brand, the big show, to go after the one lost sheep. And if you
Mm.
can't do that, you have no business being a pastor.
That's right. Yeah, that's really good. I mean, it is really um, disappointing, I think in some of these ways, because some of these people that we really looked up to over the years have just completely given away all of their well, they shouldn't have influence anymore because of their unwillingness to just keep some like basic things. Like I think caring for the sheep, it's like a basic thing, like the word pastor,
Very basic thing.
shepherd, like so with you guys, I'm curious. Maybe not you guys. I don't want you to speak on, behalf of everybody on Remnant, but
Oh, I'd
you,
like to.
you
Let me tell you
yeah,
about all of the bad stuff on those
do.
guys.
But with you guys, okay. So in the last 3 years, I'd say three, that I've noticed that it's like, hey, there's the gloves have come off, which I appreciate. You guys have been very uh, vocal about things that I think you guys have been really wise and discerning about. You guys haven't dived into things that are like not pretty clear. I mean, I feel like every situation you guys have spoken about have been like, these are now fundamentally understood as being facts, whether it's Mike Bickle or Alan Scott
Right.
or Michael Brown, and you've been really vocal about the upper room. I'm privy to some pretty terrible things that have happened there from some of the victims, just from Twitter, who have messaged me privately and sent me things, and it's like, man, that's crazy. I
Mhm.
didn't even know about that. I had no idea what the upper room is. I live in a small
Oh, there's a whole group of
tent.
victims that
Yeah.
are out there. Yeah.
I guess
Um,
what I'm curious of, what's guiding your discernment and your willingness to speak out, and like when do you decide and how do you decide to
yeah.
come out?
Yeah, that's a tough one. So part of the reason I can give several reasons. I can give you sort of my own personal journey in this, and then also some of the protocol that we use as a part of the board. We have external board members and internal. So and all of us make up the board that makes these kind of decisions. And so when it came to what we address as a group, if we've had somebody on the show, then we have to address our audience. We owe it to
Mm.
them to say something about whatever scandal just broke. So like when the Mike Bickle stuff broke, um, well, we're like, dude, we just propagated the prophetic history of Kansas City. Now it's all suspect. Like, what kind of integrity do we have if we were publicly endorsing something that we then can't publicly say we were wrong? And so we had to. But it wasn't just that we had to, because we could have just made a simple statement and done what like Corey Russell did, sort of post hoc, that felt very
Mm.
short of actually caring for victims.
Yeah.
Um, we had to get out there and do it in such a way to say, not only were we wrong, but we now want to make it right. And we want to do everything in our power to help with making it right. That's called restitution. When Zacchaeus decided to repent, he was willing to pay back 4 times the amount of anybody he defrauded. That's true repentance, is willingness to make restitution. So that was part of it. Is anybody we've had on our show, we owe it to our audience to make it right if we've in any way misguided them. Then on a more so that's kind of governed what we will and will not do. The other part of it was we're charismatic. So when it comes to doing the prophetic reviews, we've always been doing that. We're like, you guys are putting it out on public display. It deserves some sort of charismatic responding to it,
Hmm.
rather than the Justin Peters of the world who are already going to carte blanche dismiss it, because by the very nature of you saying that you're speaking on behalf of God prophetically, in his mind, you're already a heretic. And so we wanted to respond and say, look, no, we don't go that far with it. We actually think prophecy is a real thing today. However, here's what we think about this. So that was something we did real early on back in 2020, before all the scandals really began to hit. Um, and that's been sort of the framework we've taken. We've stuck within this area. If you've been on our show, then we owe it to our audience to respond to it. And then or the other part of it is if we're close to the situation. So like me with the Upper Room, that was the church I was fired from, which today they still claim they never fired me. They claim that they were going to put me on a retainer, which is all post hoc. There was never a job offer. No amount of money was ever promised me or told me that I would get to be a contract worker for them.
Yeah. Was it similar to the movie Office Space, where they just keep moving you to the
Oh
basement
yeah,
from
yeah, yeah.
upstairs, and
Oh,
yeah,
that's
you
exactly
don't
what happened. Yeah.
yeah, you
I
don't
was
have a
taken off the
paycheck
preaching
anymore. Yeah.
rotation. I was taken, I mean, every little by little, inch by inch, authority was
Yeah.
being diminished for me. My role
Yeah.
was being squeezed out.
Yeah. And
But
you
they
so
won't
one
acknowledge any of that.
one day
Right.
you were like, I would like to get a paycheck. I haven't had a
Yeah.
paycheck for a while.
Yeah. Oh man, there's so many stories I could tell there, but I don't want to, that
Yeah.
could derail me really quickly. So it was either stuff we've done on the show and that we owed it to our audience. It was a thing of integrity, or it's things that we're closely attached to and closely know and are personally involved in. We feel like an obligation to the people that we know and to truth in any way because we're personally attached to it. So anybody who sees our name attached to that, then we go, hey, we have to respond again in the same way. If you've trusted us to be a figure, then we need to be a voice that will own it if we need to. And so, like right now, one of the big scandals that's happening is the former Upper Room Denver. I used to pastor this church. It's now called House Denver, where Brian Kim is a
Mhm.
pastor. And I will say this, he is one of the most abusive pastors I've ever heard of. The amount of lies, triangulation, talked to over 20 people from his former organization acts that he abused, NDAs coming out his rear end on areas nobody needed to sign an NDA for. So that kind of, or non-disparagement clauses, they call them exit agreements. That's how they can kind of
Yeah.
get around the laws in
Mm.
Colorado because it's technically illegal to hand somebody an NDA at the threat of not getting severance. It's like a $5,000 fine from where I looked up.
Mm.
Anyway, that would be another area where I would probably speak into, and I plan to speak into it. I'm waiting for some more full information to come out, and then I'll probably be commenting on quite a bit. But those are the avenues. I think the personal thing for me was I didn't have my voice. Like I lost my voice when I left Upper Room. When I got fired, nobody talked to me. Nobody reached out to me. It was just sort of like everybody who clamored to get my attention and my time just suddenly disappeared and I was gone. And I felt every phone call that never came. And
Mm.
when people did talk to me, they didn't want to know what happened, which is kind
Mm.
of a crazy thing. Like you think about, like I know what it's like to feel completely discarded,
Wow.
to be at the apex of influence in a community, to be a celebrity in that community, then to lose it all and be nothing to those people.
Mm.
And just a bygone thing that they'd rather not look at because it's sort of a stain on their track record.
Mm.
And
Wow.
so when that happened, it took me a couple of years before I could really talk about it. And even then, like when I did my podcast, Fired from the NAR, where I tell the story about my firing, that was the beginning of me getting my voice back.
Mm.
Um, I had been so gaslit, told that I wasn't a victim. I mean, he literally used those words when I was fired. You're not a victim. The way you're thinking about this is all wrong. So the only real perspective that mattered was his, and mine was just, my crazy way of thinking about things. And so I didn't trust myself. I went to trauma therapy, counseling. And then after a period of time, I felt, like, okay, you know what? I need to say something for the sake of others. Like I helped build this community, starting to believe my own story again. And so I did that Fired from the NAR podcast. And that was like the most powerful thing that had happened to me since
Mm.
then. Like I finally felt like I had a voice again. I wasn't afraid. And little by little, I started to feel like confident and powerful again. Like, no, this is what it means to be a Christian. This is what it means to be one who stands up for the oppressed, to care for the orphan, the widow, the foreigner, and the poor among you. Um, to not be silent and to be silent is actually kind of sinful. And you think about
Mm.
the prophets of the old, they were always calling people back to covenant faithfulness, and they weren't afraid to name names. They weren't afraid to confront kings.
Yeah.
And so I think that was part of the journey for me. And I think I've had to learn how to taper that. I don't want the pendulum to swing so far that I'm just
Mhm.
calling everybody and anybody out for anything that might be a minor infraction. I want to do it for when it really means something.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's actually a great point, I think, and a lot of wisdom there, because I think if that was always the danger, if you're always calling out every single thing,
Well, it feels that way
then
right now, doesn't it?
it kind of
But this
does,
is
but
so much.
at the same time, it's not. Yeah. I mean, because as
Yeah.
you and I both know, like for every time we speak out about something, there's about 485 other stories behind it that are just, from, I mean, because it's interesting how I was thinking about this. I was at a clergy meeting this morning, and so far it's been great. I've got meet a bunch of new pastors, and but I'm now maybe cynical. Well, no, not maybe. I am cynical. I'll own that. But I'm like, I wonder how many of these pastors in this room are actually being faithful. Is a question I have in the back of my mind. So far, they have not given me any reason to doubt that they are. But
Yeah.
it's like at this point, it's super easy to buy into this narrative where it's like, man, there are no good pastors. And I know that's not true, because I also know that I have so many friends that are pastors that are
Sure.
so faithful, and so like no one will ever know who they are. They don't have podcasts. They just preach to their church of 75 people and are loving those people, whatever it is. But it sometimes feels like, man, it's been rough, because it's like anybody who had a platform, God is removing and
Oh,
God is
bro.
exposing,
Yeah, the number of
which is
stories
good.
I haven't told publicly yet,
Yeah.
and the number of victims that have reached out to me from other ministries, and I've handed them off to others in such a way that they can actually get their story out there.
Mm,
But it is, I think we're in a cultural moment where the social media has provided opportunity for people to get their voices back, and they're beginning to use their voices, and they're not
yeah.
tolerating the problem. This is like the peasant revolt, right? Like those who had no power, they teamed together and they just said enough is enough. And I think that's what's happened is we've seen so much problems, and it's just there's a domino effect of exposures. And here's the thing: vast majority of these exposures are real. Some people are freaking out going, well, what happens when it's not real? It's like, okay, let's think about the Me Too movement. Everybody's like, well, there was false allegations in that one too. And I'm like, yeah, how many? I know of one.
hmm
Vast majority of them, these women were telling the truth. These things really happened to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm finding the same thing to be true. When you start corroborating stories with victims who don't even know each other and you're hearing the same kind of thing, like this is what I experienced with the House Denver Axe and IHOP thing with Brian Kim. I interviewed somebody, or wait, they reached out to me from IHOP that was under Brian Kim, and he tells me a story about the intimidation tactics that were used and how he was discredited and discarded. Well, then I hear the same story from somebody Axe. Then I hear the same story from somebody at House Denver, and I'm going,
Yeah.
none of these guys know each other,
Yeah.
and yet their story is the exact same. And
Yeah.
so the fear that we're going to, bring someone down, or we're going to tear down somebody ministry who doesn't deserve it, is really an overinflated fear when it comes to the one that's
Yeah.
very real, that there's a lot of
Yeah.
very powerful people that have really misused their platform.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It seems like that's kind of the value of independent investigations, like real, true,
Right.
actual independent investigations. Is that there are investigations that clear people from. It's like, that was, I can understand how you felt that way, but it wasn't actually an example of spiritual abuse, or, whatever it is. But by and large, when you've got these investigations where there's dozens of victims who all, like you said, have the same exact story, the same exact
Oh,
experience, and
very little
know each other.
investigation is involved to
Yeah.
corroborate those facts. Very
Exactly.
little.
Exactly. It's like, I don't know. And then, like in the Alan Scott case, what's crazy to me is that we have audio recordings of him in staff meetings
Oh yeah, body
saying things.
shaming and
Yeah, I'm just
yeah.
like, dude. I mean, it's crazy. So, well,
Well, and it's
that's
interesting. The
crazy.
rhetoric too is like you and me are considered like the cancel culture within the church and the woke media of the church, which is like nuts. I'm as far from woke as it gets. When it
Yeah,
comes
I
to
know.
spiritual abuse, I'm like,
Yeah,
no,
yeah,
that's a real thing, and it's because we
yeah,
don't have accountability structures, and there's a lot of money.
yeah. It's kind of crazy. I mean, I obviously have not. I don't have the level of influence that you guys have with Remnant, but it's kind of hilarious to know that like Alan Scott like has done sermons about the podcasters.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
I was
I'm
like,
one of them. Same thing with
I've
Landon Shot
arrived.
from
Yeah,
Mercy Culture. Yeah, I'm one
yeah,
of the podcasters. Yeah.
yeah. So, oh yeah, I know that was what a train wreck. I mean, I actually could not make it through about more than 20 minutes of that one, but um, So it seems like you guys have been really. I think it's great to hear. There's a lot of discernment though in your process of discernment and your process of when to speak out and when not to, and that's I think that's really helpful because it models something another issue with us in the charismatic tradition of just needing to have more discernment in practice and processes. 'Cause I've been thinking about. I'd like to talk about John Wimber a little bit with you in a minute here, but
Sure.
John Wimber's greatest, well, not his greatest, one of his greatest, I think, contributions to the church was the 5-step prayer model, right? This
Oh,
idea
wonderful. Yeah.
of
I teach it.
how can we get people to be able making prayer accessible? And so I've been spitballing and kind of thinking through a 5-step process of discernment the last couple of years, and I'm currently just stealing everything from Jonathan Edwards and his 5 steps in the religious affections. But I guess when you guys are moving forward with these podcasts and with these stories or these statements, you know have you seen any, I guess, have you seen any like redemptive parts of that other than, so obviously victims feel empowered, I'm sure of that.
Oh, yeah.
I know that. Have you had any leaders I guess maybe be like, hey, I need to, because I'm thinking of the
Oh,
situation
yeah,
you mentioned
yeah.
with Mike Winger. So I'm grateful. I had not known about that leader, that he had done that vineyard pastor who was, touching God's beard and, all that craziness. And I watched it. I was just like, oh my gosh, what in the what?
Yeah, yeah.
But I was actually really quite, best case scenarios, he stepped down, and I think that was from the consultation of Vineyard USA and the pastors in that church. There hasn't been a public statement beyond that, but it was good to hear, like, okay, yes, there's needs to
I
be
feel
some.
sad because I mean, the sad thing about that is his pastor is the one who failed him.
I 100% agree.
It wasn't Mike for pointing it out, and
Yeah,
I feel really sad because this could have been corrected a long time ago, but they just
yeah,
didn't do it.
and
They were
it
so
should have been.
right. The person who's really, I just think if somebody in my church was giving these kind of words and they were starting to get some attention, I mean, I would have a conversation with them like, hey, this
Yeah,
is this is off, and let's avoid you getting more public shame. So
yeah.
who's really like at fault there is pastor failed them.
It's
Um,
also structural though too, because within the vineyard movement, we are becoming more structured. I would say it that way.
yeah.
But there
Well,
are
I feel like
area
in general
leaders.
that he,
There,
he seems to be moving it in that direction more and more so for that very
yeah,
reason. I think it's a great thing.
yeah. I think there's definitely some. It's necessity, but there's a whole lot of people that. But then I also, it's like, well, I just feel like we haven't really had the frameworks or even the bandwidth or the capacity or the awareness of like what that would look like, too. Because I was thinking about that in my own area. I don't have a lot. I mean, I have friendships with vineyard pastors in my area, in my region. We see each other every few months, but I don't follow, I don't listen to their podcasts. They could be teaching any, who knows what they're teaching.
Yeah.
But with this guy, it's like he had a pretty big platform. It looked like. I mean, I was on his YouTube channel. I was like, oh, dude, this guy's got like subscribers. Like there's people that
Well,
are
it's
following this.
massive. And even
Yeah,
after Winger did his video, his pastor defended him publicly,
yeah, I saw. Yeah,
which is like, whoa, hey,
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, oh, okay,
You got
sorry, you were going to ask, what was the
you
John
got
Wimber
props.
question though?
Well, before that, I was curious. Have you had any? So that was an example of like this
Oh, any
expose
redemption
comes out.
stories?
Yeah, I'm just curious. So in that story, Mike Winger's work, I'm grateful for it. Thank you, Mike Winger, for speaking out.
Yeah,
And now
yeah.
we've seen some positive forward progress. Have you guys had anything like that happen in any of the things you spoke out on?
Uh, um, I mean, there's been a lot of people, victims, who've come to us and said, thank
Mm.
you. Like I had a lunch with a couple yesterday and they watched my Fired from the Nar video and they said, bro, we came to your church because we felt like you understood what we just went through.
Mm,
And so I have tons of those stories. People who come to
yeah,
me with like, man, this helps me make sense of things. And that's the tough thing is when you're going through an abusive situation, you feel like this person is hurting me so bad, but yet they're the pastor and there's so much good happening. So therefore they can't be bad. Something must be wrong with me. And then somebody watches that podcast and they're like, oh, oh, that's what happened. We know that something bad did happen to me. That was wrong. Somebody's
Mhm.
vision became more important than the people it was meant to serve. And so so I get tons of stories like that. I've had one of my best friends, I lost that friendship for several reasons. We had our own parts to play and contributions to the breakdown of the friendship. But one of the other things was, Michael Miller was triangulating between us, telling me one thing, telling him another thing that would always garner loyalty to Michael Miller from Upper Room, but turn us against one another. And we didn't talk when I did that Fired from the Nar video. We didn't talk for 2 years. I cut him off. I was so traumatized and couldn't
Mm.
handle the emotional weight of it all. And I'm so scared. But I'm on a plane from Dallas to Denver, and this guy's sitting in the 2 seats down the aisle from me.
Mm.
And I'm just like, well, I mean, this is probably God. Um, Time to reconcile. And we sat and exchanged notes, and he was finally going, I get it. I didn't want to know your story before, but now I want to know it. And the redemption on that personal relationship has been monumental for my wife and I. His wife and I met, or his wife and my wife used to be roommates and best friends.
Mm.
This couple, my wife and I met and connected at their wedding. And so we're seeing some of the redemption side of all of this, where people are starting to wake up and go, something's wrong. Something's wrong with the charismatic movement. Something's wrong with our ecclesiological structures. Something's wrong with our capitalistic mindset, making church into a business rather than a institution that's meant to serve people and care for them.
Mm.
Um, so I've seen some of that, and then I haven't seen many leaders that we've pointed to actually repent. But I'll tell you what, someone called us out. Stephen Kozar, Justin Peters, and Chris Roseborough. They confronted us about our failure to confront wolves or call people wolves.
Mm.
And we walked away from it going, they were right.
Mm.
So we're trying to do the best we can to repent publicly and show what that looks like, because we're not perfect.
Yeah.
So I don't know, man. Is that what you mean by redemption? You mean like people
Yeah.
willing to repent, or
Yeah.
just
I was just curious.
relationships restored, or
Yeah, because I know that, I mean, obviously victims are always going to feel empowered when people believe them and when they tell their stories. That is, makes sense. I've experienced that myself with the
yeah?
Alan Scott stuff. But I was just kind of curious, like, have you had any leaders who have been like, oh, you know what? You're right. Because that'd be
Oh,
amazing.
from Upper Room, there's been a number of people that have reached out to me. Some who are very closely tied to the organization. They're like, I couldn't see it, now I see it,
Mm. Oh,
and
cool.
many of them are beginning to speak out.
Mm.
There's others that see it, but they're too terrified to say anything.
Mm.
Um, and I don't know what to say to them. I get it.
Yeah.
I get why it's scary. And then there's others who see it that are still part of the organization, and I don't know anything other than cowardice,
Yeah.
failure to have a backbone, a failure to stand up for what's right. It's
Failure
like they
of
see
nerve,
it, they
bro.
acknowledge failure of nerve. Well, that's the crazy part is they're like, yeah, what happened? He was absolutely wrong, but I can't say anything. I feel like God has called me here. It's like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
those things aren't mutually exclusive. Like
Yeah.
God can call you there, you should still speak up.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't know. I've seen a mixed bag there.
Oh, cool. Well, let's end with the question about John Wimber then, and I
Sure.
appreciate you, yeah, you sharing about that. I guess I'm just kind of curious, like what has been John Wimber's, influence in your life? Obviously, Jack Deere was significantly influenced by Wimber, and their friend in his
Oh,
friendship.
totally.
So I'm assuming that passed on to you. But yeah, just talk a little bit about his impact in your life and your ministry.
Um, there's so many things that I was taught by Jack that I didn't realize came from John. That's happened later in life. That some of it, Jack would just say, "Oh, John used to say this," and I'd be like, "Whoa!" I mean, the 5 step model. Golly, that's when I started getting a lot more success in praying for the sick. It was monumental. And then learning from other disciples of John, like Ken Fish, when it comes to deliverance ministry. Oh my goodness, that's a game changer. Um, but there are other just simple things. This is going to be kind of an edgy statement, and I'm not going to quote. I'm going to quote a person, but I'm not going to name them for their sake. But I was connecting with some of the early vineyard people down in Orange County, not Orange County,
Your Belinda.
Anaheim, Yorba
Oh,
Linda,
okay. Yeah.
Um, and they were talking about the Alan Scott thing. I mean, they're just devastated. It was actually the Fired from the NAR podcast I did about my firing from the upper room that really spoke to them. It really
Mhm.
was, it helped them make sense of some of what they experienced with Alan Scott. Um, and one of the things when they talked about the body shaming that Alan did, they said, I don't get it. If you wanted to go to the cool church, you would have gone to Calvary Chapel. That's where all the good looking people went. We were the ugly church. And when she said that, this woman said that, I started to tear up and I just thought, Lord, well, that's what I want to be.
Mm.
Give me all the ugly ones. I'll take them. I want to be the ugly church. Because I see that. I see that value that John had. He didn't care about any of it. He cared about like the real people. And when you meet most of these
Mm.
people, they weren't like CEOs and big business leaders. These were blue collar people. They had a homeless pantry that they fed. They took care of real needs of real people and didn't cater towards the wealthy among them.
Mhm.
So, I mean, that's a big influence for me. And people don't often talk about that, the influence they
Mhm.
just had on the poor and how they cared for your average Joe, your blue collar worker.
Mm.
I love that about the early vineyard people. Other things that John did that I thought were wonderful um, is he would put structure around whatever God was doing. And so, if they didn't have somebody lead worship, well, I guess we don't have worship. It's like
Mhm.
you don't have somebody to do it, then we just don't do it. And then if we have somebody to do it, well, let's put structure around it. We'll do it. And so they were always just working with what God gave them and not trying to make something happen.
Mm.
And that's huge.
Yeah.
Um, so I've learned from that. If God provides us with something, then we'll put structure around it. We'll get behind it. But if He hasn't given it to us, well, that's okay. So
Mm.
I don't know. It was just such a low expectation in the sense of like the kinds of expectations they put on people. They weren't trying to make people fit a mold. They were just building something around the people that God had entrusted them with, and I love that.
Mm.
I don't know if you hear that much from the Vineyard days. Is that something that is talked about?
Yeah. Well, I
I'm not
mean,
in those
yeah.
circles, so I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. I think that, I mean, yeah, a lot of the, I would say the original OG, we have a lot of mutual friends,
Yeah.
down in Yorba Linda. It's funny whenever I'm down there. Well, Michael Miller and Roundtree were just here, or they're
Well, I
coming.
mean, I'm newer friends, and I feel like on top of the world to get to hang out with these people. Really.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm always like, oh, well, that's cool. But yeah, I mean, that community of people who go back to the days of Wimber, you hear a lot of stories like that. And that, when I first started, doing videos on YouTube or whatever it is, I had been writing for a long time, blogging as they used to call it. And I just had this desire, and I still have this like goal. I think where my niche is just being I've read everything I can from Wimber. I've
I did too.
listened. Yeah, it's like I'm like a Wimber nut. So what I realized is I had two quick things before we jump off. I had an experience when I was probably about like, I don't know, 19 or 20, and I was mowing a lawn, and I don't know exactly how old I was, but I was listening to to the audio conference of when Wimber went to Kansas City to bring correction to Mike Bickle. And listening to these like 6 tapes over the course of a few days of mowing this massive yard, I was wrecked because I realized and listened to Wimber that he was the real deal. He was a father. He was a thoughtful. I mean, I was just blown away by how good it was. And if only Mike had listened. That's kind of the conclusion. But then I read his fivefold ministry article, which was written towards the end of his life in response to Peter Wagner. And it is a NAR. I mean, if you want
Oh,
to understand
you got to send
that,
me. Yeah, you got to send me that.
I'll send you, it's on my Substack. I have a John Wimber resource page. It is, if you want to understand the difference between classic third wave, evangelical empowered folks and NAR, he calls it all out. It's brilliant.
Well, I talked
What,
to Carol before she passed, and
mm-hmm.
we asked her flat out, did John believe this? And she goes, no, John didn't believe in any of that crap. It
Yeah,
was the funniest little clip.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's literally what she would say. Yeah. So, Just those things have been but I'd say like all the OG people, they have all these things they remember about Wimber, which I think they've got lost. And so one of my hopes and goals is just to be able to have some influence among modern, not just Vineyard people, but I think there's people who have similar sensibilities to you and I, where we're charismatic, man, but we also see some value in other theological frameworks or resources, or we really value the Bible. When we don't want to just be, I don't know. I don't want to disparage the Bethel crowd, but that world is just
I'll do that for you.
yeah, it's just well, some of those folks are, it's funny because like some of those people love Wimber, and I'm like, hey,
Yeah, but
like
they're so far. The apples have fallen
maybe
far from the tree.
totally. I'm like,
Uh,
you need to read more Wimber. I think if you read more Wimber, it'll actually help right the ship a
well,
little bit.
the let me back up because I think this is a worthwhile little thing to note. Um, Bethel's playbook is to do something big,
Mm-hmm.
really big. They've got to have this. They've got a grandiose vision that they're going to fulfill. I don't think that was John's intent at all. John was
Was it?
just not at all. He wasn't out
Yeah,
to do something big. He was out there to just do the plane. And the plane looks like taking care of the people God has entrusted you with.
that's right.
When I was a part of the upper room, we were about doing something big. And
Mm-hmm.
once it got big and people started singing our songs and the songs were up for Grammys, I started to ask some questions about whether this big thing, what was the impact it was actually having. Because I also saw people getting hurt. This big thing screwed people up and spit them out.
Mm,
And today, I'm not interested in doing something big.
yeah.
Um, I want to see, and I'm seeing this. I'm seeing people in my local community doing the stuff, right? Everybody gets to play. You show up on it's once a month on a Saturday. Eventually it'll get to once a week, I'm sure. But once a month on a Saturday, if you need prayer for healing or deliverance, there's any one of these people, 16 to 20 different people that show up to pray, and they will pray for you. And oftentimes they will see things happen. And I'm not the one doing it. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the beauty of it. The,
Yeah.
the, the gifts have been given away. And it's something that Carol said when we interviewed her was how she and John were talking, and John was talking about his travel schedule. And she's like, really, do you have to do this? And he goes, this isn't mine. We have to give it away.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of the reason he did what he did. And I love that. He wasn't
Yeah.
doing something big. He was giving it away. Everything he had, give it away. So
Yeah, that's great. Well, I appreciate you. I appreciate your ministry and all the stuff you guys are doing, man. And also thank you for being willing to jump on and be a guest,
happy
man.
to.
Yeah, cool. Well, I would love to just really quickly, what are the best ways for people to stay connected and follow the work you guys are doing?
Oh, Uh, I've got a website called Thomas Ministries. That's where I do a lot of the speaking and training in the gifts of the Spirit, teach the 5-step model, teach basics on deliverance, basics on hearing God and prophecy. And so that's just really where I put my calendar up and where people can get more information or book me and then a vast majority of my work is here in Denver, Colorado with my local church. And then we've got the Remnant Radio. I don't put my sermons online, and that's intentional. Like I need some degree of separation between what's online versus what's just me. Like I want a safe place for my kids. I don't want them to see dad as like a person everybody. I don't know. I don't know a way they can avoid that, but I've tried to create some degree of separation to where when I'm preaching on a Sunday, I'm just preaching to my community.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and a lot of people get frustrated that I don't put my sermons online, and I'm like, too bad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd say Thomas Ministries or the Remnant Radio, YouTube. That's what we do.
Awesome. Sweet. Cool, man. Well, I really appreciate you being on. And for our listeners, thank you so much for listening. We will be back soon.